everyone, and welcome to I Wonder Who, our Q&A series where we interview the wonderful people behind and in front of the lens of some of the documentaries that we have on I Wonder. For those new to I Wonder is a streaming service dedicated to documentaries and current affairs, combining favourite documentaries from festivals around the world with critically acclaimed, hard-hitting topical films, series and shorts. Our curation marries trending news stories and trusted journalism with captivating real-life stories of the people and events shaping our world. I Wonder is available in Australia, New Zealand, across Southeast Asia and Hong Kong, and you can watch it via iWonder.com or via Apple and Android mobile and TV apps. I'm Alex, I'm head of content for I Wonder, and joining me today are directors and producers of people you may know, Katharina Gellein Viken and Dr. Charles Kriel. I'll just introduce both of them. Katharina's latest work includes People You May Know, 3-part documentary series, Ari and Her Half Kingdom, festival documentary Just a Number, and dramatic feature Hard Tide. Kat started as an actress, giving her passion for story and character, and began her career producing, directing, and starring in her award-winning short film Of Her I Dream, based on the true story of losing her mother. Charles Kriel, or Dr. Charles Kriel, is the former special advisor to the UK House of Commons Select Committee on Fake News, investigating Cambridge Analytica and Facebook. He frequently works to support free press and counter radicalization in conflict zones. He's the author of several books and an award-winning composer. Welcome both. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks.
Thank you.
What we'll do is we'll play the trailer first, and then we'll crack on. Let's have a look.
Do people in churches know their personal information is being gathered to use in political campaigns?
No.
The meetings are secret, the membership is secret. Kellyanne Conway is a member, Steve Bannon is a member. They hope to use Trump as God's wrecking ball.
I had used and worked with predictive analytics and big data tools. What would it look like to use it within the realm of ministry? There's no better product than the gospel.
I read an article that you said you worked with the original data guys, Cambridge Analytica.
We worked with...
You can add the family dynamic of propensity for divorce.
They're targeting extraordinarily vulnerable individuals.
Opioid dependence, different mental health disorders.
States decide to rewrite the U.S. Constitution.
The ultimate position to be in is when your adversary has no idea that they're in a war.
My secret recorders are these.
Past security, past the Secret Service.
I bring greetings from President Donald Trump.
There's 2 ways to rewrite the U.S. Constitution. You can handle marriage equality, you can handle issues of women's rights, term limits.
The American government is slated for destruction.
We own the relationship space. Like, we own it. That's the church.
I mean, wow. So there is so much to dive into, and I can't wait to get started. I really talk to you guys about, the filmmaking process, something that is, you go undercover. There's so much to kind of discuss on that. And then obviously, the subject matter and really getting into some of those issues that we see in the trailer. So first of all, Charles, how does one become a UK advisor to the parliament?
It really happened through happenstance. I've been doing work in war zones, conflict zones, and frozen conflict zones like Nagorno-Karabakh, which has been kicking off for the past few weeks, and going there and supporting local journalists. These are people who are oppressed by their governments, they're oppressed by the enemy within wars, they're oppressed by oligarch-owned media, and so on. And so I was doing work to try to help support them in their work. And in the course of doing this work and moving up within the field by going to progressively worse and worse places, ultimately I found myself in Iraq and Ukraine doing lots of work. Well, finding myself in Iraq and Ukraine, I found myself around a lot of people who were specializing and a lot of people who were specializing in counter-radical, and I became a specialist in that. But that's also one of the things that Cambridge Analytica does. So I came to have a lot of knowledge about what they were doing and how they operated. And we'll get into the ethics of it in a minute. But then when Donald Trump was elected president after Brexit had happened, both of which were huge surprises, and it turns out Cambridge Analytica was president both. I felt like I could put the dots together and understand something that had happened. And the chickens had come home to roost, and this work was now being done in our own countries. So I submitted some evidence to the select committee, and they hired me.
Right. Wow. Okay. Amazing. And so, you know, that's quite the story. And Kat, you know, out of that, and, you know, Charles going to the committee, what made you want to create a documentary and film that process? And, you know, what was the draw?
Well, Charles is first of all neglecting to mention that the first witness session he had, he walked in and when he said Cambridge Analytica, and he also, by the way, suggested that Facebook should be broken up on antitrust law, everybody's jaws dropped to the floor, and nobody had ever said anything like that, certainly not in a witness session. This was kind of when everybody was more, and legislatures certainly were at the level of, isn't Facebook this kind of nice tool that connects everybody? So when they chose him, I thought, well, this is making something about fake news and disinformation seems a really good topic right now. And then sure enough, headlines started rolling across the world once Chris Wiley came out and gave testimony. And this committee just became a legendary first step in holding the social media giants to account. Nobody had ever done it before. So it was an absolute first in the world. And they were also the first UK committee ever to go to the US, interviewing Google, YouTube, and Facebook, I think, and Twitter.
Yes, and others.
And as they told increasingly untrue stories, it just became a very, very fascinating story to me. And following Charles getting increasingly terrible and scary evidence, much of which has not been made public still. So that was the origin of it. And then after about a year, when we had interviewed all the MPs and sort of thought, we'll make a story, I think our directive back then was a little bit more like The Great Hack, for those who've watched that. And then we figured out that space was kind of done. And when the report that the committee made came out, which then recommends what the government should do legislation-wise, the willingness to do anything was very small, because they, amongst others, found that Brexit had been interfered with. The will to do something about that was non-existent. So then we had a sort of crisis of faith of where are we going with this project? And at the same time, Charles was receiving evidence every single day from whistleblowers, from researchers, from also conspiracy theorists, people like that, who just came with various evidence. And at some point, I think you were very tired and said, okay, I don't think I can read anymore. And almost that same night, Brent Allpress got in touch, who told us an incredible story of Cambridge Analytica having collaborated with a Koch-funded nonprofit in the US to create a microtargeting platform. And this microtargeting platform specifically went after people with addiction problems, marriage trouble, financial distress, all things that we all go through at some point. So we thought, this is just a story we have to tell now, even if we have to flip the film. So we packed our 3-month-old in the back of the car and drove across the US to investigate. So that was the origin of the film.
I mean, it's a shocking story, and as a Brit, you know, the whole Brexit thing I could barely bear to talk about. But you know, what is it like as a couple with a young child together making such a striking documentary, and as you say, there were points where you sort of feared for your safety because of the things that you knew. So can you talk to that at all? I mean, what goes through your mind? What were some of the difficult decisions you had to make to keep the story going?
Well, one of the things I think is that you don't know it's going to be a striking documentary while you're working on it. And you don't even know if you're going to manage to get to the end. You're taking constant risks with a very open-ended outcome, and that makes it particularly challenging to continue to make those decisions. But then also the issue with our daughter, and taking our daughter on the road and taking a lot of really dangerous evidence. Normally my attitude about stuff like that is, I'm not in Baghdad, so that's okay. But because I've been in some really incredibly hairy situations and encounters with Islamic State and so on. But when it's your child, then it becomes very different. So we took as many precautions as we could, and we tried to make decisions that wouldn't put us in harm's way.
Well, I remember 2 or 3 specific situations. One where Charles was given a hard drive from Parliament, where one is in the film where he was carry it through Paddington Station, I think it was, when none of the MPs even wanted to touch it. Another thumb drive you brought home that I think you went down the road to examine because we were afraid that it was actually an explosive device.
Nobody wanted to. Nobody in none of the MPs wanted to take this thumb drive and put it in their computers because they didn't know what would happen. And I brought it home, and they're like, "Here, Charles, you go do it." And I take it home, and I thought, well, if this is a bomb, and so I walked 2 blocks down the road and sat on a park bench and opened it up. It's
also how very diplomatic of them.
And there was a memorable moment that didn't end up in the film where we doorstopped one of the GLUE alumni churches, for those who've seen the film. So the alumni churches were the 16 original churches who rolled out the Insights platform. And they're quite secretive. They're almost like fortresses. They're big mega churches. And we almost got an interview with one of them, and then they shut it down last minute. So we tried to doorstop them. And I think Charles and I had a minor kerfuffle in the car discussing whether we were willing, or Charles was not willing to take his baby onto the property in a southern state in America where people carry guns and there's almost certainly police security at the church. So that was not a risk that you were willing to take. So we did a drive-by.
Kat, who's a very sophisticated woman and really far from naive, is also Norwegian and can't really read the signs of the American South like I can.
Oh, right.
It was
a specific area, I guess. But on that note of safety, and you've mentioned already, there's we see several whistleblowers and people willing to come to you and be filmed and go on film with their story. I mean, how do you make these guys feel comfortable enough to do that? Is it simply the impulse of getting the importance of this story out there that drives them, and how do you set that up with them?
I think a phrase that we've all used, and I'm sure it's not our phrase originally, throughout the process has been sunlight is the best disinfectant. And the more evidence is out there, the more people speak, the easier it becomes for others to do so. And of course, there's some great people who had already forged a path, people like journalist Carol Cadwallader, Chris Wiley, the people who made The Great Hack. There are people who had already in this space done a lot of very good work. So I think people like Fox-Hughes, who's in the film, really thought that it was time. He used to work for SEL, who was the parent company to Cambridge Analytica. And I think he just really felt like it was time to do that.
I think Sven probably took the biggest risks, but people in our film took different risks on lots of different levels. And some have experienced loss on lots of different levels. not directly because of their involvement in the film, but directly because of their whistleblowing status in general. And you just have to honor what people have done.
Also, you and Sven are both war zone veterans, so that helps.
Well,
you're used to risk. I'm not.
The difference being that Sven is SAS, so he actually knows how to save his own ass. I don't.
It helps to have that guy around, you know, like, oh, he could totally save me if I needed it. But, you know, and then on the flip side of that, then, you know, you've got the whistleblowers on one side and sort of, you know, creating a comfortable environment to film the story. And then how do you approach the other sort of subjects of the story, you know, like JP de Glance and Matt Engel, for example? What do you tell them you're interviewing for, you know? How do you get them to kind of speak to you?
Well, interestingly, I told them the truth, and you have to also remember we didn't quite know what this project would turn into. So we asked them to talk about their programs and their modern outreach programs for their churches, and I think they're selling a product. So everybody was very willing to come and sell their product, and that's what it is. And de Glance says so himself, that, you know, there's no better product than the gospel.
Right.
So this is, yeah, it's for sale, and that's what they really wanted to do, and they're very passionate about it, and so they were willing to come and talk to us about that.
What's most fascinating to me about that is that in both of those interviews, the people who were being interviewed spoke to the church first. They spoke of the church constantly. De Glance put everything within a biblical context. So did
Matt Engel.
Matt Engel from Glue. But once the film was released, Glue then published an open letter about what they were calling conspiracy theory around their company and what they were doing. And what they said is, we are not a religious company first. We are not about religion. We are not about the church. So fundamentally what they did is once they were busted, they denied Christ. I find it to be a really interesting configuration. And it's a metaphor that I hope that a lot of other people pick up too.
Yeah, I mean, the flip-flopping nature of that is pretty insane, especially given, you know, in the film we see the adverts that they run, you know, super targeted towards faith and community, and it's really impactful in that you're just like, you can't avoid how there's a the religiosity of it all is right there in the face.
Well, the foundation of it is something that Matt Engel talks about early in the film, and we didn't put a lot of it in there, but some of it's there. That he talked to me a lot about the biblical precedent for data, and that was one of the foundational models that he quotes Nehemiah as talking about censuses, I believe, in the Bible. And that, you know, the pulse of the people was taken even back then to try and gauge your community and where there's at and where there's suffering. And, you know, he's absolutely right about that. But then they're talking about taking that suffering or taking what you know and deploying it and giving it digital wings. And that's the potential for misuse is great.
And I think what really gives it that sort of personal edge and the implications to everyday people of that. So when we hear from Beth, who was a student at the time, and, you know, she was sort of indoctrinated in a sense into getting further and further involved in some of these ultra-conservative groups, which, to be honest, sound fairly militant as well in the way that they go about canvassing and sort of getting opinion towards their agenda. You know, she was encouraged to cut ties with her family and disown non-believing friends. So, you know, did you find many people who were, I guess, one, had realized that they were being sort of radicalized in this sense, and two, were willing to talk about it?
We struggled. I mean, to find people willing to talk about it. It's a tough one for many reasons. You know, I think people trust their church.
Right.
So once you're in, and as Gloria explains in the film, this is not something that happens overnight. So it's something that happens over time, little bit by little bit, and it's absolutely not just digital. It's about community, and that's what de Gans talks about as well. Once you have a robust community around you, and all your friends act and vote and do things in a certain way, and if you're vulnerable and you need a community around you, it becomes very hard to say no to that. So, and there's a fine line here, because the church is supposed to evangelize. They're supposed to bring the word of God. They're supposed to bring the word of Jesus. But propaganda for the purposes of politics is difficult. Through his disinformation work, people are very rarely, they don't really want to be told that they have been tricked or that they have been manipulated,
Right.
or been sold propaganda. Now, we did find a lot of people online, particularly when we're looking for people to interview, who are unhappy with the practices of companies like Glue and don't feel like it's in the spirit of Christianity. And likewise, I've been very happy with the response I've seen from faith communities to the film, because I was really interested in that, to see how they reacted, and how they felt about seeing this, and if you're okay with your church doing these things. Another thing I'd add is that what we found was not just these programs, but the fact that the churches themselves have largely gone digital. And that happened really fast, because they've been a slow institution to adopt digital methods. So what we found was that very often a church would, when we asked, okay, what software systems do you use? What do your congregants use? They would say, well, this company over here does that, a software company, and we don't deal with that at all. And if we asked them, do you share data with anybody? They would say, of course not. But they were very largely undigital themselves. So even if the software company that makes their app, makes their digital sign-in, makes their donation tracking, all of that interface, their data policy might be non-existent, and they might share it with anybody. So I think a lot of churches are also unaware, and the congregants will be unaware that it's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. As you say, it's been, it's a completely traditional institution. And so I'm sure some of the pastors, who are sort of thinking, oh, this is great, I can reach more people, have no idea that it's really going on. And, I think a really powerful and haunting statement made by both you, Charles, and Sven in the film is when you say, the techniques used by these microtargeting companies to manipulate the vulnerable people are actually by and large the same as radicalist fundamental groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. That is pretty impactful, and I think helps probably to maybe put it into a perspective for people who, somewhat like myself, just the sphere of big data and how that all works sort of slightly goes over your head, but that's something you can really focus on and say, okay, well, hang on a minute, we've been fighting that for years. How on earth is it okay to, use that domestically? Because that's, what they're doing. So, how, with that in mind, is there a way beyond showing this film to absolutely everybody and anybody to publicize the issue more and make people aware that they're being manipulated in such a way, and even fight back against it, if there is a way to do that?
Well, I think this disinformation has, we've watched it in the last 3 years, and it's partly due to some of the work that various committees have been doing, but disinformation has become the hot topic, if for no other reason than Donald Trump and his Twitter account. And it's made people very aware of disinformation and the way that disinformation works. Unfortunately, what it hasn't done is made the targets of Trump and his Twitter account aware of how disinformation works. And so, even as we speak, we're in the middle of this election, which has got to be the most disinformation-filled election I've seen in my lifetime. It's extraordinary. But most people are not going to be vulnerable to being recruited into a far left or a far right program. You know, if you're looking for somebody that you want to turn into a neo-Nazi, the signs and symbols are not that their head is shaved and they have excessive tattoos above the neckline. You know, the signs and symbols are that they have very few opportunities. They may have been through some addiction in their life. They've got no way up and they've got no way out of the situations that they're in. They may be suffering from some grief or sadness or divorce. They are in emotionally vulnerable positions, and they don't have a way to change things. These people are very recruitable and can be flipped. You know, so if you want to, you're never going to get someone from the left and push them to the right, or someone from the right and push them to the left. But you're going to get someone from the right, and you can push them out into the point of becoming a Proud Boy, arming up and doing violence. So it's always people at the edges that they're trying to recruit and they're trying to push. So I think that and how we build resilience for people like that is really very difficult. It's kind of incumbent on the resilient to help those who are not resilient. We need to help our neighbors. We need to help people who we know are suffering. We who don't have an agenda. Right?
Yes, so it's, yeah, for sure. And this idea of being targeted by your self-declared medical data is a new operation which we will see flourish everywhere very soon. It's not just through church programs, it's also through apps on your phone, like mental health apps. This kind of data we're already seeing it being used. I've also used the example of myself quite a lot in this process of, you know, I lost both my parents young, and at that point in my life, I was really searching. I was really alone. If somebody had targeted me at that point, because they would have defined me by my friends and my likes and everything as somebody who was open to an invitation to church, because I grew up evangelical. I used to attend church. I would absolutely have joined a grief program. I would absolutely have been prone to being targeted. And it's not because I'm particularly one way or the other. It's just because I would have been vulnerable in that moment and I would have needed the community. So as Charles says, you know, helping people without an agenda.
But we also need to really start thinking about, and people are thinking about it, and people are working on this, but legislation is absolutely vital, especially with the tech giants. You know, we've entered some weird period now where suddenly we're willing to have tech giant monopolies and let people get away with that. And antitrust laws done a good job of preventing that kind of thing, but not this time, not with tech giants. So they're getting away with a lot. And the idea, just the sheer thought that I could target someone with, I don't care, advertisements for toothpaste based on them having had an opioid dependence is fairly criminal.
Yeah, I mean, you know, and I think
politically,
and in light of the pandemic and COVID, and you know, we see the stats of mental health, you know, decline and opioid crisis getting even worse. And so, yeah, going back to the, you know, people's healthcare data is sort of, I guess, you know, at risk of filtering into the system, and now more so than ever. I guess you could say that the, you know, COVID is really detrimental to this process.
For sure. And if you look at the end of the film as well, some of the companies that we've dealt with in the film have very quickly, I think in March, April, flipped and included new surveys in and new mail outs to their congregants where you can check in with people's mental health every week. Now, again, there's a good side to that. But of course, this means that every week you can tell who's had COVID, who doesn't have COVID, who's suffering mentally, who's suffering financially, who's suffering in their relationship every week. That's a lot of data.
It is a lot of data. And you have to remember within this as well what the motivations are of the different forces. So the churches, sure, they want to open back up because they want to help people, but why have this big concerted national campaign for the churches to open up again? And the reason for that is that within the Council for National Policy, you have the oil industry. That is one of the biggest contributors to the CNP and the operations of the church networks and broadcast networks and so on. And as we will all remember, for the first time I've ever seen, oil actually had a negative value in the second quarter of this year. So people were watching their fortunes collapse in real time. And they just wanted everything to open up and people to get back out there and drive again, because they were having to now pay to store the oil that they had. The follow the money works on this really well, and that's a tragedy in the middle of something like COVID.
Yeah, and following the money and following the hierarchy of the things like CNP, and you infiltrated their conference. And we see, and I suppose it's not too much of a spoiler because we see him in the trailer, but lo and behold, here comes along Mike Pence as, the sort of top of this tree almost, or at least talking to the conference. And did you see that coming?
Not at all. Didn't see it coming at all. There were so many, in retrospect, there were signs across 2 or 3 days as I'm slowly coming to New Orleans. I'm coming to the conference. I'm getting there, and it's like there are little bits and pieces I could have picked up that told me I was going to end up in surrounded by Secret Service agents before the day was out. But no, I didn't see it coming.
I remember when
as soon as I knew, I got out.
Right. Yeah.
Well, when we tried to plan that event and getting Charles in there, we had booked, as he talks about in the film, we'd booked a room. And I remember them getting in touch saying, oh, you can't have that room anymore. So we thought, okay, well, we'll do something else and we'll go and book breakfast and we'll be there. And then once Charles got there, they were saying that there's going to be a lockdown in the hotel, no ins or outs. And he called me, and it's funny because he happened to be recording his whole journey to New Orleans. So this call is in the film. And he called me and he kind of goes, there's a lot of police in the streets. Seems to be an awful lot of, it's like some kind of motorcade going on. And I couldn't come with because we had our baby and we figured it was too risky. So I was sat at home going, what is going on? So that was quite a scary moment.
It was New Orleans. Yeah. In New Orleans, you only shut down Canal Street for Mardi Gras. So when Canal Street was shut down, I should have known. Right.
And, we see with sort of maps or schematics of the hotel, and it's being shut down. It was all very it's exciting to watch, but it must have been hair raising to sort of be a part of. But it was all very Mission Impossible, Jason Bourne-esque.
I don't know. We thought it was quite exciting. Well, as you say in the film as well, right up until the moment you realized it was time to go.
Yeah. So the fact that Mike Pence is there, obviously, this is, yes, the film is focused on this sort of US nature of what's happening. But can you talk a bit about the global implications of, what you've uncovered with this network? Are other faith denominations at risk? How could, for our audience in Asia and Australia, how can they potentially be at risk from this, or how could it affect them, if at all?
So, please go ahead.
Well, so first of all, Kriel, who we run into in the film, is the world's largest evangelizing organization, period. Certainly by their own regard. I'm pretty sure they're right about that.
Kriel is short for crusades.
Yeah. So they are, I think you'll find their operations everywhere. So they're a glue client. So that's just across the board. If you watch the film, what's it called? It was the documentary about Steve Bannon that came out last year. You see a clip that didn't go in the film where Steve Bannon talks about Catholic churches having this data that when you walk into the church, they just know that you're there, and they know. And this, we ran across programs like this when we investigated for the film, apps that pick you up the minute you're in the vicinity and things like that. So we know it's in operation throughout the Catholic Church. Specifically in Australia, Hillsong is a Glue client, which is of course a huge and an original Australian franchise. I think it's Crossway Church, who is also a Glue client, who's a Hillsong affiliate. And Scott Morrison is a firm attendee. So
I was going to say, you know, you hear things on the grapevine that Scott Morrison is sort of involved in that sense, which actually brings it directly in parallel to what we see in the film, just sort of the Australia version, really.
Yeah, and our researcher has also, and he is based in Australia, he has uncovered a number of disinformation operations that have been going on throughout elections, and I would let him talk more in detail on it, but he's identified things like targeting people who they know are homophobic in certain key districts. So this stuff is very much in operation everywhere that has, because data is a cheap tool. These platforms, and our data is already out there, and having a platform like that, it's not an expensive, difficult thing to do. Once you have this geo-targeting, you can do almost anything. I remember one of the founders didn't end up in the film was telling me that we can geo-target almost anybody. And there are certainly grief and healing programs like the ones we examine in the film that also exist in Australia.
Right. I mean, and, you know, one of the things that, you know, we're looking at is these things happening domestically in all these countries. But what sort of the public and sort of, you know, people like myself are aware of is that the sort of global network and infiltration and, you know, with sort of Russia hacking the US and, you know, having an involvement in Brexit. So there's even this idea of, being able to infiltrate network from a foreign nation. And Sven's closing remark in the film is intriguing, to say the least, where he says, you know, to go further, you need to look at the Russia connection. And so my question on that is, have you gone further? And is there a people you may also know coming soon?
There could certainly be. There is a lot of stuff out there. Whether it's wise to take it on is another matter.
There, you know, at some point, the Paradise Papers, Panama Papers, I've heard it called both, the Daphne Galatia story, the Cambridge Analytica controversy, the Trump campaign and Brexit, it will be shown that they've all converged in certain points. Now, part of that is because people do business with people, and at, you know, operating at this certain level, people are doing business with people. You know, it's very clear that Eric Prince, who is Frontier Security Services, who was Blackwater, you know, also has close ties to the CCP, Chinese Communist Party. Who'd have thought? But indeed, it's there and it's easily documented, and it's not, I don't think it's particularly controversial to say that, because it's people operating at a particular level of power and money. So there is one hell of a big story to tell there. The problem is you look like a madman while you're telling it.
Right, I can imagine. But it's, you know, if you were to make it, I'm sure that we would be absolutely enthralled in the same way that we have been with people you may know. And with that, I think that's a good place to wrap up on that sort of cliffhanger of what might come. And, you know, thanks so much for joining me, guys. It was a really great discussion, and to hear your point of view was invaluable. So I hope that everybody gets to see this and watch the film on iWonder. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.